Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, reading from the Williams translation. The family tree of Jesus Christ, a descendant of David, a descendant of Abraham. There are two genealogies in the four Gospels. The four Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark skips the beginning of Jesus, as it were, and starts with the main event, the ministry of Jesus. In the case of John's Gospel, we have the opening verses of the Gospel dealing with Jesus at creation and Jesus being God. In Luke and Matthew, we have two genealogies and two different ones at that. Each of these genealogies are written with a purpose, which is not to say they are uninterested in truth or reality. In simple terms, theology trumps accuracy. Now, that should not be a shocking statement. Even in our own day and age, a genealogy is not always about truth and accuracy. Matthew traces Jesus' descent from Abraham. Now, the question is not whether that is accurate or not. I'm not denying the accuracy of the idea that Jesus is a descendant of Abraham. I'm just saying that is not the key point in the statement. We know that the father of Abraham is Terah, and that is told us in Genesis chapter 11 and verse 27. Since we have a record of Abraham's ancestor in the book of Genesis, we know that Matthew knew this, and that Matthew therefore chose not to record it. You see, therefore, for Matthew, he is putting the emphasis on Abraham in the same way as discussed in the previous reading, that the whole of the genealogy is focused on David. So the connection of Jesus to Abraham is for Matthew a theological connection. If we go to John chapter 8, verse 39, we read this statement: Abraham is our father. Jesus' Jewish opponents identified with Abraham as their ancestor and being a descendant of Abraham. You see, what they did is mistook physical descent with spiritual connection. The idea is fleshed out by Paul in Romans chapter 4. The important point for us is the centrality of the figure of Abraham in Jewish thought. To build his genealogy of Jesus off his descent from Abraham is to state that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. In Luke, the descent of Jesus is traced from the first man, Adam, and therefore is a statement to his Gentile audience that Jesus is the Savior of the whole world. Notice in each case we are dealing with theological statements primarily, and not a concern with factual statements. When we read the Gospel of Matthew, we have the focus in the document being addressed to a Jewish audience. Now, we need to be careful here and not confuse with any sense that Matthew saw Jesus as only for the Jewish people. We noted in an earlier reading how Matthew, in a text for the Jews, nonetheless bookends the universality of the gospel message in the Christmas story and in the Great Commission. So even though the original audience for the Gospel of Matthew was Jewish, the gospel still has universal appeal. Yes, Matthew was showing the relevance of Jesus for his people and his time, but that relevancy is also for all people at all times. Here is a truth that all good presentations of the gospel must have, and that is a sensitivity to the culture and place where the gospel is proclaimed. At the same time, we must not make the gospel fit into that culture. It is a culture that must be subservient to the gospel.